Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabados of Dalmar, and together with my co-host Mark Ronich of Statewide News Service and jbiztechphilly.com, and now the columnist for the Jewish Press.
Right, well, we have thank you, Rabbi, and you know what? We have a very special show today.
All right, what's that?
This is our 200th episode of the Jewish View.
And you're sponsoring a Kiddush?
And I'm sponsoring a little Kiddush here, but first let me introduce our guest is Steve Stern from Skidmore College, and he's going to talk to us about Yiddish folklore and where he grew up and all that. But I just wanted to say that, Mazel Tov, we have a cake here that says, if it doesn't drop, that says Mazel Tov 200 Jewish Views. So we're going to cut open some cake. So we'll cut some cake here and
try to talk as right out of our mouths full.
And we'll really making a Kiddush.
And we'll have a little bit of cake.
No schnapps.
All right. This is another cake that's Pas Yisroel for...
Well, I'm on a diet. But
well, you seafood, you eat it, I know.
Yeah.
So this is a little bit of cake
right,
for you.
Thank you.
And
it comes with
we
a
always
fork,
have
too?
comes with a fork, yes it does, here you go.
That's an old Theodore McKell joke over here. I saw him say that.
With the soup and the spoon. And
Yeah, that's
right.
Well, with literature, we have to
And here you
bring
go,
in some
Steve.
kind of
Enjoy.
comedic literature, like Shakespeare also is literature.
And we're going to have a nice nice show here where we're going to talk not about all the Jewish views that we did shows for, but we did have many, elected officials, and we had a lot of culture on the shows, and we've had a lot of variety. And I'm very happy that we were able to do this within 18 months.
That's incredible.
It was,
really.
Wow.
It's a short period of time. So.
Well, you guys talk between yourselves, and I'll just...
You'll do the eating over here.
L'chaim and Mazel
Yeah,
Tov.
I know that Steve wanted some schnapps.
No,
L'chaim, but all right.
Maybe he's got some in that cup there.
Yeah, you
I'm
never
afraid
know what
not.
he's hiding there. But so L'chaim, it should continue with great success for us. I mean, Rabbi, I have to give a blessing.
That's right. Please do.
Part of my job. It should continue with success, with good health, and more people are tuning in as we speak. Always every show to subscribing to the Jewish View and tuning in, and we're reaching farther and farther around. And like I say, we've had great success. We should only grow with even more success.
That's right. That's what we need. Much more success. And then if someone wants to subscribe to the sponsor the show, we're always open for sponsorships.
Yeah, I'm the rabbi over here.
No, there you go. So,
No, let's get down to business.
Steve, Yiddish folklore. Tell us, is that what you teach at Skidmore College? Or?
No.
Okay. So what do you teach at Skidmore College?
I teach creative writing at Skidmore College.
So what is your interest in Yiddish folklore? How did that happen?
Well, do you want the long or the short version?
Well, the 6-minute version.
Let's
We have it's a half-hour show.
if I
That's
can
right.
press it. Yeah, I mean, it's not an exclusive interest in Yiddish folklore. I mean, I love Yiddish literature, and one of the reasons that I like writers so much, like Eyal Peretz or Moshe, Mendele Macher Sforim, Isaac Singer, Sholom Aleichem, is because so much of their work is grounded in folklore.
Right.
And it's a literature that really comes from a long tradition that begins with Torah. And
I've had people. And I've written. I've read that they actually. Just even literature. Of course, I'm a rabbi, so I consider it a holy works. Of course, the Bible, but even as a literature, and these professors were just totally. On a secular level, this is some of the best literature, like the Psalms, the poetry of the Psalms, are incredible.
No, that's where it all begins. But I guess what happened with me is I was, raised in a Reform Jewish synagogue in Memphis, and 50s and 60s in Memphis, Tennessee, it was a lot like a Methodist church. We had pipe organs, rabbi in ecclesiastical robes, the choir, very little Hebrew in the liturgy, and I had no real sense of a tradition growing up. and didn't for a long time. I mean, I came by it sort of accidentally, working, in fact, for a folklore center in Memphis, Tennessee. It's not at all specifically Jewish folklore. I began transcribing these tapes that were oral histories of old Beale Street characters. Beale Street was the black main street of the American South for like 100 years, and it turned out that there was this weird kind of symbiosis between Jewish shopkeepers, pawnbrokers, merchants, and the black and characters on Beale Street, and so the black population would read in abyssal Yiddish, and the Jews were the only merchants that would white merchants that would sell to the black community in Memphis in those days. So there was this interesting kind of cross-pollination, and
it's a subject in its own right. Maybe we don't have time for it now, but just really historically, sometimes you see, because old neighborhoods, there's Jews and there's black, and there's one incident out of thousands of interactions between black. Oh, you see, they can't get along.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is that the black and Jewish communities really got along, and they still do. That's what I'm saying. There's one incident, and of course that's going to make headline news.
Yeah.
And 99% everything's going all right.
Yeah.
Oh.
No, the Jews were, in Memphis were the first to employ blacks, but.
One of the things that I always say is when you look at who marched from Selma to Montgomery, it was the blacks and the Jews arm in arm walking over the bridge.
Yeah.
I think one of them was Jewish that got killed, or 3 people got killed, if you remember.
Yeah.
And
there was some Schwerner was one of the 3.
That was his last name, Schwerner?
Yeah, Schwerner. I can't remember the others.
But when you talk about folklore, so you don't really tune into one specific culture.
Well,
you're Jewish, so you like Yiddish, but now you're saying black, or there's so many.
Well,
every country has its folklore.
Well, the reason I brought that up was because I was assigned the task of researching, Jewish roots in Memphis, and it turned out I began to interview the pawnbrokers, and they'd all grown up on North Main Street, which was a old neighborhood called the Pinch, I was in my early 30s, and I'd been writing stories for a long time. They always had a kind of a nod to Jewish characters, and which was a surprise to me, but not really any substantial Jewish content. And when I began to research this old community, and I would talk to the immigrants, the children of the immigrants, people that had grown up there, who were still, advanced in age, had long since moved from North Main Street, and they would tell me their stories, and this old neighborhood began to kind of reassemble itself, and I thought of it as sort of, pulling up the Titanic from the bottom of the sea. I mean, it was a great sort of revelation to me, because I had grown up in that city without any knowledge of that community, or that kind of community, because it was a pretty self-contained East European, Jewish ghetto in the South. So it made it this kind of weird anomaly, and I was fascinated.
So let's focus on just this Yiddish folklore, because you said
this is how I came into it.
Right, that's how you came into it. That's why I'm using this as the segue at this point. So you said something about Sholom Aleichem earlier. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it's there's a window of about 70 years during which there was this great flowering of Yiddish literature. As you know, it was a time of late 19th century Jewish Haskalah, and the paradox of the literature is that it was at a moment when that culture was really beginning to kind of die. and the passions of the young were moving into political kinds of.
Are you talking about United States, or even
No, I'm in
Russia, even Europe?
I'm in Eastern Europe now,
Really?
and that's where the literature began and kind of ended.
Now, Sholom Aleichem was based on Fiddler on the Roof was based on the story.
These were the Tevye stories.
That's right.
The famous Tevye stories. but all of these stories had a kind of source in Yiddish folklore, and these wonderful tales, characters like Herschel Ostropolier, who was a sort of Jewish trickster, like a Puck out of Shakespeare, and and supernatural elements like Dibuks, who were spirits that take possession, dead spirits that take possession of the living, or stories of reincarnation, Gilgulim, and stories of hidden saints like the Lamed Vav Tzadikim.
Every generation had 36 righteous
36
people.
righteous men for whom God restrains himself from destroying the world, so long as if the righteous men are in the world, well, okay, we'll let it survive another generation, and all of these magical elements that I had no idea that there was such a tradition in Jewish culture, and it was fascinating to me. It was as if the Reform rabbis that I had grown up with had kept the secret,
and you unlocked the secret.
Well, it felt like that at the time, I mean, it was a kind of secret culture that had been literally, actively suppressed by the historians, Heinrich Gretz and Simon Dubnow, the great 19th century Jewish historiographers.
Or maybe the American scene was just they wanted to forget about the old past.
Well, yeah.
That's what I'm saying. For the most part, Eastern Europeans, maybe not German Jews, spoke Yiddish, spoke the Jewish language. And, here, fast forward, here we're in the 21st century, or we know, in the 60s,
Sure.
70s, how many of our peers speak Yiddish?
Yeah.
And, almost guarantee that, say, well, did your grandparents speak Yiddish? And they'd say yes.
Right.
So they actively, like you say, as they suppress it, or let's be good Americans. That leads me to a good question, because, like you say, they were Sholom Aleichem, and like Mark saying, the Fiddler on the Roof, that's totally Jewish. But then,
which is about all most Americans know of Sholom
yeah.
Aleichem.
But that's exactly what I'm bringing out. It's interesting. On one hand, it was suppressed, but then there was, like you say, a segue between the Yiddish literature and which would be considered even modern American literature, until the extent that Isaac Bashevis Singer won the Nobel Prize. I mean, he was surely recognized, not some archaic Jewish, Nobel Prize winner of literature.
He was my graduation speaker, commencement speaker at UAlbany when I graduated there. Yeah. Couldn't understand the word he said. Had this broken English, everything.
So, but I mean, he surely was recognized in America.
He was, absolutely.
He was recognized, but how many other Yiddish writers of his generation does anyone remember? Who remembers Chaim Grada? Who remembers David Bergelsen? Who remembers Itzik Manger? Who remembers Moshe Kulbach? These are great writers, and some who I would contend were of the stature of Singer, who was also a great writer. But he was the one that and provoked all kinds of jealousy, in the community of Yiddish writers who were sort of dying out at the time. But in a sense, I think that he was a throwback, and an extraordinary writer. But he stood alone, and he was, in a way, the last of that writer of that world.
It's interesting. Obviously there's Jewish writers today and Jewish musicians, and maybe can you see their roots? Maybe so Americanized you don't see them. But I don't know. Maybe it's not literature, but it's even Bob Dylan. His father was a cantor, so I'm not saying his music is cantorial. But you know what I'm saying? It's
I think
came
there's some
from
cantorial
really?
elements in Dylan. Yeah,
That's interesting
yeah.
talking
Allen
about that.
Ginsberg said that. In fact,
Really? I
you
didn't
know,
know
yeah.
that.
There's
Really? Never heard
a
that.
song on one of his albums, Desire, I think it is, that Ginsberg wrote the liner notes for, and he contends that you can hear, you know, that cantorial strain in the voice and in the
Well, that's what, in a way, that it's exactly what I'm trying to bring out. That maybe it's, you know, so it was Bob Dylan. He's not a Jewish songster. You don't say that. He's just the American icon.
Yeah.
You know, he is it. But on the other hand, like I say, they're taking Jewish themes or ideas or culture into the modern.
And that's the thing that we were talking earlier about, you know, Irving Howe, who had predicted that literature of a specific, you know, expressly Jewish content would die out. And the irony is that, in fact, after the generation of Bellow, Roth, Malamud, you know, who were, you know, aggressively American authors, and you know, and if you call them Jewish American, you know, they would bridle at that.
Really?
But
You
then
know,
there are, you
because
know,
Malamud is so Jewish. You
more
know.
than the others, but he still,
Really?
you know, hated the label.
That's interesting.
And well, because they came out of, you know, a culture at a time when there still was a lot of anti-Semitism, and you know, and this idea of we are Americans. You know, I mean, the beginning of Bellows' Augie March is, you know, I'm first line, I am American, Chicago born. You know, but the next generation, you know, having sort of experienced the baby tossed out with the bathwater, you know, a lot of writers have gone to fetch the baby, you know, and try to revive it, you know, after it's been kind of lying.
So just so we can tell the audience, Bob Dylan's real last name is Zimmerman.
Correct.
You know, so, and also when you talk about cantorials, I mean, I always think of Al Jolson.
Jolson,
You know,
sure.
that's what Asa Jolson was his. He was his.
And the
given
first
name.
talkie, you know, is
You know.
it's a pretty Jewish film. You
It
know,
is.
I mean, the son trying to
The jazz
become a
singer.
secular singer. I mean, and that's that's an immigrant story. It's a classic immigrant story. It's
then-
even an African American story, you know, where the gospel singer becomes a blues singer. You
Right.
know, goes from spiritual to secular.
It's interesting. I never thought of it that way.
And
Yeah,
they-
you have
Because
a
they
parallel
said,
to black
because
people.
they said it was the devil's music.
The devil's music,
right.
yeah.
Secular music.
No, yeah, from going from gospel to
To blues.
Blues. Blues was the devil's
Yeah,
music.
and jazz, you know,
Jazz,
it's
yeah.
also considered,
You know, way out there, you know.
devilish, diabolical.
Really, I never heard that. I mean, there was also an anti kind of feeling from the traditional blacks that they didn't want these
Oh yeah.
modern. I don't know. It's interesting.
No, it still
Oh, it-
exists. You know, it
Is it-
still exists. So many of wonderful, like Sam Cooke, you know, began as a gospel singer and broke with it. And
B.B. King, maybe.
B.B. King, well, Aretha Franklin is
Yeah,
another.
okay.
You know, but with some of them there was a real stigma in the beginning, and they had to overcome that. You know, and I think that you see it with a lot of the children of Jewish immigrants,
Right.
where they're breaking with the tradition, and moving into, well, in literature, exclusively secular.
But moving back, Elie Wiesel always kept his.
Or Chaim Potok, I think,
Yeah.
still had that. But, the iconic Jewish American authors were secular with a vengeance, and it's only recently that you see writers like a Shaban or a Jonathan Safran Foer or Nathan Englander who are returning to some of the original Jewish themes and some of these Yiddish folkloric veins that I've been talking about, where there's an instance, a dimension of magic, that kind of folkloric component in their work. And it's something that I think Irving Howe, the critic, could never saw himself as a prophet in terms of where the trajectory of Jewish writing would go.
He predicted about secularism.
And thought that the Jewishness, that the Jewish component of Jewish writing, like for instance a writer like Henry Roth, who wrote Call It Sleep, which I think is maybe the best, quote, Jewish American novel, period.
What's the name of the novel?
Call It Sleep. It's a Lower East Side novel, and it is immersed in Yiddish, and it's almost a bilingual novel. But he does a thing in that novel that I've never seen done before, in that when his characters, who are all immigrants, are speaking English, it's a very broken idiom. And when they're speaking Yiddish, he writes in English, but it's a wonderfully elegant, lyrical, musical kind of English. So that's the way he makes the distinction.
And when you teach in Skidmore, do you teach? Well, I mean, again, you have other folklore and every, I think,
Well,
culture.
he teaches creative writing,
Yeah.
which would be different than
Yeah,
this
now,
concept, so-
I mean, it's been a while since I've even taught to Jewish American
audiences.
But when I taught that, I tried to give students a kind of cook's tour, of Jewish literature from Torah, and Abyssal Talmud, and then the folklore and the way that the folklore was integrated into these Yiddish.
What's your definition of folklore? How do you define it?
Oh, I don't have a handy definition, but
Generally.
I think about myth, which, if you're thinking of like great Greek and Roman myths, or if, in a sort of a controversial sense, you can talk about Torah, as Jewish mythology. These are stories that, well, not so much Torah because it enters history, but if you're talking about like an Adam and Eve story, this is myth that takes place in a timeless realm. Folklore is usually attached to a particular place and a particular time. So in a way, it's the kind of crossroads between myth, which is a timeless realm, and history. And the characters can occupy both worlds simultaneously, and that's a thing that you don't see in just traditional Western literature very often.
I wanted to ask you, because when you spoke and you gave this great lecture and it had you had a slideshow with it and everything.
The slides didn't necessarily correspond to the lecture,
but I wanted to ask you, most of the audience was not Jewish, and you were throwing in a lot of either Hebrew words or Yiddish words.
Yeah.
Did you get any feedback from anyone that said, gee, I really didn't catch this, I didn't know what that...
I don't know, I was careful with that lecture to try to give, English synonyms.
That's why I was just
What was the
wondering
name of the lecture, though?
It was called
You were there, Mark,
Yeah.
over here. We're going to test Mark over here. Give him a test, Professor.
Creative Amnesia.
Yeah.
But, the subtitle was The Persistence of Magic. And so, it was an opportunity for me to present some of this, just the idea of the magical component to Jewish literature, to, a secular audience, a Skidmore audience.
I was just wondering, because I was just looking around when you started, talking about the saying Hebrew or Yiddish words, and just looking around to see, who's going on there, looking these up, or on their phone, or who's like looking lost, and
or who's sleeping.
I was just wondering. No, you were very engaging, but I just wanted to know, if you had any feedback from that lecture.
It's interesting. I saw my parents went to Jackie Mason. It's comedic. It's not literature. But on the other hand, it's so Jewish, and then she sees there are a lot of non-Jewish people in the audience, and she says, I don't understand how they're laughing. I mean,
Yeah.
my mother was so Jewish, it was a good joke.
Right.
So it's interesting. I mean, it's the same idea that you're saying. You're so Jewish, but
Well, my last book had a glossary, a Yiddish
Okay.
glossary, and
but they appreciate it. That's what Mark's saying. People, non-Jews can appreciate Jewish literature.
a few,
Okay.
not as many as
As you might
as
think.
one might wish.
So what was you were designated some sort of distinguished professor? At
Oh
the,
yeah, it's called a
Oh, don't be
Mosley.
so modest.
Well,
Come on,
it's
tell
called
us.
a Mosley lecture, and
Yeah.
so they choose one of the faculty to give this
yeah,
auspicious lecture.
well, it
Mark,
is.
tell us about it because Steve's too humble. I don't understand, and I'm sure viewers don't either.
Well, it's a nice honor, and and you get to eat dinner with the president, and
Who we're trying to get on the show, so
Oh,
you
really?
should put a plug in that.
well, he's a nice guy.
He is,
Yeah,
very busy.
Yeah, very very genial and
Maybe in the
intelligent.
summer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what is your next? What are you going to be doing next? In terms
I got a
of-
book coming out next week.
Oh, what's the book? What's the
Well, it's actually called The Pinch.
The
and
Pinch.
Yeah, it's a
PINCH.
yeah, which is the name of the North Main Street ghetto neighborhood
In
in
Memphis,
Memphis.
yeah.
So it's about 300 years of it. Because my contention is that the first Jew came with Hernando de Soto, who traveled through slaughtering
This is
Indians.
not fiction. This is true.
It's
I mean,
fiction. It's fiction.
Oh.
But there were a lot of
It's creative
a lot of
writing.
Morano Jews who actually attached themselves to these conquistadors in the 1600s and came to America. But it covers about 100 years in the history of North Main Street.
And who's
So-
publishing this?
It's called Grey Wolf Press.
Yeah, how'd you get hooked up with them?
They've done a couple of books of mine.
They're based in New York or in
Minneapolis.
Minneapolis,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
This is historical fiction then, a little bit.
Well, there's a good deal of history, but it's pretty fanciful history.
Right.
I play fast and loose with it, but a lot of local lore. The yellow fever epidemic, which was in the 1870s. My Jewish peddler arrived during the yellow fever epidemic.
There really was a yellow fever.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It killed a third of the population of the city, and
I never heard of it.
no, it was.
Well, thank goodness. You shouldn't. hear
Uh,
from those
it
things.
was catastrophic, and then he has a nephew, the next generation, who is an escapee from a labor camp in Siberia.
It sounds interesting. Maybe we'll have to read it, Mark. And have
Well,
a
we
book
will.
review over here.
How many pages is it?
About 370, I
Okay,
guess.
it's around 400 pages or
Yeah,
so.
it's novel-sized novel.
Okay, I just know if it was War and Peace. I mean,
No, No.
And where can people find this locally, or do you have to just go online and look for The Pinch?
No, I'm hoping it's in the bookstores,
I mean, is it Barnes and Noble, or are these like the Bookhouse, the smaller
It should,
bookstores?
it should be around. It's
Well, who are you marketing to? I mean, someone has to meet with these folks to get it into the bookstore.
Grey Wolf is,
Grey Wolf does it for you?
They distribute. I have nothing to do with this, And the
Do-
less I know about the business of publishing, the happier
Oh,
I
I
am.
see.
Actually.
Okay. So, do you have? Did you get an advance on this financially, or how do you?
Oh, astronomical
No,
advance.
I mean I see what what Governor Cuomo got for his book, and it didn't.
Yeah,
sell
I didn't
any.
get what Governor Cuomo got. No, it's not. It's a nonprofit press, so
Yeah.
the advances are not big, but it's an intimate place to publish, and they've been very good to me. And they published a book called The Wedding Jester in the 90s sometime, and it won the National Jewish Book Award.
Okay, good.
I'm still waiting for the National Gentile Book Award.
No.
All right, well, I think.
Well, on that note.
I don't
On
think that's
that note
coming.
over here, I think it's time for a cue to listen. It was very interesting. And hey, Mark, we'll have to get back on when we do some reading and we
That's
can have
right.
a book review. We'll have to read the book. But you've been a lot of successful and, continue with your success, of course. And, on the Jewish View, we like the Yiddish folklore. But again, you're all over with all kinds of folklore and creative
It's been a
writing.
pleasure having you on the show.
Well,
It
it
really
was-
has.
it was-
Thank you so much for coming in.
It's lovely talking to you both.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.